Again, welcome from my side. It is such a joy to see that one of the issues that we are dealing with this morning is seating space. It's such a good problem to have. Praise God for that. Thank you so much for joining us. As mentioned when we went through the bulletin this morning, we will be continuing with a series started by Pastor Jonathan through the book of Genesis. And it's been now a couple of months since the last sermon on Genesis was preached. And also the way in which I'm going to approach it is a little bit different than the way Pastor Jonathan approached it. We won't be going through every single verse by verse. Instead, we will be looking at large chunks of narrative as it is written in the book of Genesis. And so, Lord willing, we will finish Genesis chapter 1 to Genesis chapter 15 in 7 weeks, where we will be looking at the stories, the narratives that God is teaching us from the book of Genesis. And so maybe right off the back, I just want to set the expectations right. So to this morning's sermon, as we will again just be quickly going over Genesis chapter 1 and 2, it's not going to be an apologetic sermon. By that I mean, it's not going to be some defense of Christianity versus science or things like that. Yes, I will briefly just mention some of the tensions that exist, but that is not at all the focus. This morning the focus is to look at Genesis chapter 1. And what does the Bible teach from Genesis chapter 1? And ironically, whenever you start to read a book, or you wonder, is this book worth reading? What is one of the best ways to check it out? It's a bit of a cheating method. Well, you just go to the back of the book, right? And you see how does it end. And it's the same. In fact, the best way for us to start this morning, as we start with Genesis chapter 1, is actually to go to the whole back of the Bible, to the end of the Bible, to the book of Revelation. In Revelation chapter 4, verse 11, let me read for you what is being said. In Revelation chapter 4, verse 11, we read the following words. Revelation 4, verse 11, the last verse. Worthy are you, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power. For you created all things, and by your will they existed and were created. Amen. Why does everything exist? Why are we here? Why is the universe in a state of existence? Well, simply because it was and it is the will of God. It is God's will to glorify Himself. But now we might ask, okay, well, how? How does God glorify Himself through creation? Because, brothers and sisters, God is busy telling a story. You know our English word history? It's actually just His story. God is busy telling a story in which He is the main character, in which He glorifies Himself. And we have the great privilege of participating in that story and reaping the benefits of His grace, His mercy, and His glory. Let me quickly read for you what all of it is about. Why everything exists is because of His will. But now He is working out a story, a plan of how He will glorify Himself. And that plan is revealed to us in the book of Colossians. In Colossians chapter 1, I'll read for you from verse 15. Listen to what the Apostle Paul writes. He says, He, Jesus, is the image of the invisible God and the firstborn of creation. For by Him, for by Jesus, all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through Jesus and for Jesus, and He is before all things, and in Him all things hold together. You see, everything, without exception, everything that can be created was created by the uncreated Jesus. Jesus who is God Himself. Why? Because we're heading somewhere. Verse 18. And He, Jesus, is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything He, Jesus, might be preeminent. For in Him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through Him to reconcile to Himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of His cross. You see, all of history is a narrative, a story that God is telling, a story of His grace shown towards sinners. And so the book of Genesis is so crucial because it allows us to step into the very start, the stage, what set the stage for the story. That's why Genesis is so important. You see, Genesis is much more than just the creation of the heavens and the earth. Yes, that's where we start. But if you read the book of Genesis, you know what you see? You see not only creation, you see the beginning of life, the beginning of marriage, of family, of nations, of governments, of covenants, of promises, and also we see why we have the issues in our lives and in this world that we have today. Why do we have sin and why do we have death? That is what the book of Genesis teaches us. It is truly the book of the beginnings, not just of creation, but of life, family, nations, marriage, governments, covenants, promises, and yes, even sin and death. And you see, if you are here in the evenings, you would have noticed a word that we mention a lot. It's a big word. Tomorrow you can brag when you go to work that you know this big word now. The word is eschatology. It's just a fancy word for saying end time studies, the studies of the last things. You see, eschatology is important. We must know where we are headed. There's a reason God gave us so many books of the Bible about the end times. But you know what's also important? Is protology, the study of the beginning things. That's also important. Because if we get the first things wrong, how can we expect to get the last things right? If we get Genesis wrong, how do we know when we start to get on the right track? Will it be Exodus? Will it be Leviticus? Will it even be Matthew, Mark, or Luke? So we need to take Genesis with we need to treat Genesis with absolute urgency. Listen to what a famous church historian, Philip Schaff, wrote on history. You see, Philip Schaff was a church historian, but he was more than just a church historian. He was a historian of all things in the world, one of the most brilliant men of his age. He writes the following. He says, "The central current and the ultimate aim of all history is the kingdom of God, established by Jesus Christ. The grandest and the most comprehensive institution in the world is the church. It is as vast as humanity and as enduring as eternity. All other institutions are made to serve the church. And in the interest of the church, Jesus governs the whole world." The church is no afterthought of God. It is not just some amendation to the plan of creation. But the church has always been the eternal forethought and the controlling idea of God. It was the plan from the beginning, the middle, and the end. And God works all of history for the benefit of His church and the glorification of Himself. Amen? So, as already mentioned, this morning isn't going to be an apologetic series, but we will be spending time briefly looking at Genesis chapter 1. Not verse by verse, not word by word, but focusing on the main themes. And so I want to invite you this morning, please take your Bibles and open up in the first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis. I'm pretty sure no one will ask where that is. And I want you to read with me as we start this morning. I've got too much notes. I've got too much sermon for my time, so we'll be seeing where we end this morning. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, the darkness He called night. And there was evening and there was morning the first day. And God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. And it was so. God called the expanse heaven, and there was evening, and there was morning the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together in one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together He called seas. And God saw that it was good. God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind on the earth." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, and the trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, there was morning the third day. And God said, "Let there be light in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years, and let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the fourth day. And God said, "Let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let the birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens." So God created the sea creatures and every living creature that moves with which the waters swarm according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening and there was morning the fifth day. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things, and beasts of the earth according to their kinds." And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in His own image. In the image of God He created him. Male and female He created them. God blessed them. And God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." And God said, "Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food." And it was so. And God saw everything that He had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Let's pray. Lord, we are thankful that we can continue with the series that Pastor Jonathan started. And Lord, I pray that You would bless us as we venture through this book. Teach us who You are, and teach us who we are, Lord. We pray this in Your holy name. Amen. And so when it comes to the book of Genesis, I'm pretty sure all of you are aware that there are a variety of interpretive approaches to the book. Some suggest that the book of Genesis chapter 1 and 2 at least, must be considered allegory, meaning It's only symbols and metaphors, and we can't really be sure what it means, but there's some lessons that we can maybe extract from it. But that's not really right, and I'll get to that as to why in a moment. Others, again, view Genesis as a creation account myth. They claim, and you've probably seen a TikTok video or a Facebook reel or a YouTube short where someone claims the following. You see, Genesis isn't really unique. They were just plagiarizing some ancient Middle Eastern creation accounts and myths, and that's where Genesis came from. That's not true at all. They'll give examples. They'll say, for example, there's a very ancient document called the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's a very fascinating story. It's one of the oldest documents we have in the world. They say, you see, the Genesis account is just a copy, a plagiarism of the Epic of Gilgamesh. That's not true, and anyone who says that proves that they have never read either Genesis 1 or the Epic of Gilgamesh. You can just go Google it. You can read it for free on the internet. It's not the same at all. In fact, the biblical account of creation, Genesis chapter 1, is a direct attack on all the pagan ideologies and views of creation. All of it. There's this pet peeve I have with Christians today, where Christians, they like to go to the book of Genesis, especially Genesis chapter 1, and they try to treat this book like a scientific document, trying to do some scientific analysis from Genesis chapter 1. We need to be careful when we try and do that, because Genesis chapter 1 was not written in a Western or a modern setting. It was written at least 5,000 years ago in a different continent with people who spoke a different language, who had strange and different world views from our own, and the only way we can relate to them is what God has revealed both to us and to them. And so when we read the Bible, especially Genesis, we need to understand and read it within that context. You see, the ancient peoples who had the book of Genesis as it was revealed through God's prophets, they didn't have such a thing as atheism back then. Everyone believed in a God of some sorts. Everyone had a superstition of some sorts. And Genesis chapter 1 was not written to attack atheism. It was written as an attack on polytheism, the worship of false gods. That is what Genesis 1's focus is. And we this morning will take it from that perspective. But then, at the same time, I want us to be careful and not to call Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2 simply poetry, simply a metaphor. Yes, it is true that Genesis, especially Genesis chapter 1, has massive elements of poetry built into it. There are men today, very prominent men that are good men, like William Lane Craig, who's an apologist and a debater, who says that we need to look at Genesis chapter 1 as historical myth. Historical myth. What he means by that is not so much having a focus on its history, but treating it as if it's mythology. Meaning, it's a story that can contain elements of truth, but we need not take it too seriously. It's a shame to hear such renowned men as William Lane Craig say that. Yes, the same is true for others who would say, for example, that the 6 days in Genesis chapter 1 must be interpreted simply as long periods of time, each day being representative of thousands or even millions or billions of years. But when we examine the text right now, we cannot make that argument. You can believe that, but I'm almost certain, and we can make a solid argument that the original writers and readers would not have understood it that way. Some try and work all sorts of modern theories and academic studies into Genesis chapter 1. They'll say, for example, the whole history of evolution fits between Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 and Genesis chapter 1 verse 2. And yes, we will deal with that, but all of that is trying to come with our modern sensibilities and our modern ways of interpreting the world and bringing it to an ancient text. It's not something we can do. It's not something we should do. You cannot just do with the Bible what you want to do with it. Imagine your boss did that with your paycheck. You see, I interpret this 0 as nothing. So this 20,000 rand is 2,000 rand. It's my interpretation. Oh, you'd be up in arms. You cannot do that. A number means a number, a word means a word, a full stop means a full stop, a comma is a comma. But when it comes to the Bible, we throw out all reading comprehension and just do with it what we want. You can't. If you do that, at least be honest with yourself. We need to read the Bible from the perspective of what the original writer or writers intended us to understand and what the original readers would have understood. That is how we need to approach the Bible. And so before we now jump into Genesis chapter 1 as a study, maybe let me just quickly address some of the questions I know you have. And I would encourage you, the sermons Jonathan preached on Genesis chapter 1 and 2 up until Genesis chapter 6, it is on the YouTube channel. Please go and listen to them, work through them. He did an amazing job. I would encourage you to work through them. But this morning, let's quickly just address in a few minutes. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. If you want to have these discussions afterwards, let's have them. But for time's sake, I do not believe in the theory of evolution. Do you know why? And my answer might surprise you. I don't necessarily believe it because it's not mentioned in the Bible. There are many things not mentioned in the Bible. Calculus isn't mentioned in the Bible. Algebra isn't mentioned in the Bible. Accounting isn't mentioned in the Bible. You see, the Bible is true not just for what it says. The Bible is also true because of what it does not say. What if the Bible said 1 + 1 = 4? If the Bible said that, what would we do? Would we now be trying to rewrite the laws of logic and math to make it fit the Bible? No, that would obviously have proven that the Bible is not from God. You see, the Bible is not only true for what it says, but also for what it does not say. And so yes, there are some very clever ways in which Christians have tried to fit in the theory of evolution into the biblical narrative. I give them props for that. But my belief, or rather lack of belief in the theory of evolution, is not because the Bible argues for it or against it or explicitly denies it, but primarily because of the science itself. You see, there's this notion, especially in media and Hollywood, that there is a consensus among everyone who calls themselves a scientist. And they all agree this is the way it worked. But that is not true. That is not true. It is not a matter of faith versus science or religion versus facts. Even in this discussion, there are many within the scientific community who themselves are not buying into the idea of the theory of evolution. They look at the facts, they look at the evidence, and they say, we can't conclude anything from this. Yes, we can develop a theory. That's why we call it the theory of evolution. And that's what they're trying to do. But scientists, those within the medical and biological professions, they disagree among themselves. For example, let me give you a few examples. For most of the late 1800s and the early 1900s, it was recommended by doctors that if you want to live a healthy life, you must have a healthy habit of smoking cigarettes. It sounds strange, but my grandfather was one of those. My grandfather started smoking since he was 6 years old. It was recommended to him by the doctor. It said it will help him with his asthma. In earlier years, the ingestion of mercury, if you don't know what mercury is, it can greatly harm your body. The ingestion of mercury was seen as a way to fight cancer and all other illnesses within the body. It's eventually then been proven since that no, it doesn't help. In fact, it kills the body faster in other ways. There's a modern myth in today's world where you will have things like fat-free everything, but they don't tell you the quantity of sugar in the amounts of foods. For example, we have a friend who said, wow, look at here, there's fat-free muffins. I'm like, yeah, of course it's fat-free, it's a muffin. But look at the contents of sugar. How much sugar is in that muffin? Because that's what's harmful. There's a reason they say fat-free, because they're trying to distract you away from the sugar contents. All I'm doing with this line of arguing is saying that we need to be careful of coming to the assumption that there is a unanimous or a monolithic consensus. There isn't. Because science, and when I say that I mean true science, is about finding truth and patterns of the material universe. True scientific fact and the Bible will never contradict each other because God's creation will always glorify Him. Now, there is much more I can say, and for the sake of time, I won't go into it. We can speak about the laws of thermodynamics and how everything moves from order to disorder. We can talk about how evolution is true on a micro scale, but not on a macro scale, and look at all those type of examples. But for time's sake, let's just leave that and continue to jump into our text. Now, here's a couple of slides that I would just maybe quickly go through just to confirm the point, because I'm making a bunch of statements this morning, and it would be wise of you to go and check up those statements, as you should do with everything. But maybe I can just point you to a few things. For example, in a very good book written by Dr. Stephen Mayer, which I highly recommend every Christian should read, one of the commentators on that book, which is not a Christian, he's an agnostic, a self-proclaimed agnostic, he says, Stephen Mayer's thoughtful and meticulous book, Darwin's Doubt, convinced me that Darwin has failed. The deniable Darwin and other essays that the book of David Berlinski is also essential. David Berlinski is also a brilliant mathematician and a doctor in his own right. Another example, just give it some time, this might happen a few times this morning. One of the scientists says, there's no reason to doubt that Darwin successfully explained the small adjustments by which an organism adapts to local circumstances, changes to fur density or wing style or beak shape, yet there are many reasons to doubt whether he can explain the big picture, not the fine-tuning of species, but the emergence of new ones. Another example is Darwinian evolution is gradual, step by step. Yet, then there's this thing called the Cambrian explosion. Again, if you don't know these words, don't worry, all right? It's okay. This is just, I want to prove a point. Of around 500 million years ago, a striking variety of new organisms, including the first ever animals, pop up suddenly in the fossil record over a mere 70-odd million years ago. All right, so I'm not making any argument regarding dates or timelines. All I'm showing out is here we have one group of the scientific community completely disagreeing with the other group of the scientific community regarding the consensus of evolution. You can do what you want regarding the timelines that they mention. There's a recent form that went around where more and more scientists all over the world are starting to voice explicitly their opposition towards the theory of evolution because they're saying it's being taught as a fact when it continues to remain, and even more so to be a theory that is being brought in disrepute. Other examples that we can see, for example, is if the theory of evolution, according to the microbiologists, are right, why are scientists and paleontologists more and more discovering dinosaur fossils where the skin is intact, where they can withdraw blood cells and live tissue from the bones of dinosaurs, which, according to them, had to have gone extinct hundreds of millions of years ago? And if you want these slides, I'll give them to you afterwards. But now I want us to focus on getting where I wanted us to go, to the book of Genesis. Genesis chapter 1 and 2. Again, I want to invite you, if any of these conversations are of interest to you, let's have them. It's just, I only have about 25 more minutes left. I'm not going to spend them making you look at slides. All right. So Genesis chapter 1 and 2. Genesis chapter 1 and 2 was masterfully written, beautifully written. As mentioned, it's not allegory or it's not a myth. It is history. John MacArthur writes, if you do not treat Genesis chapter 1 as historical record, at which point do you begin to treat the rest of the Bible as historical record? If you interpret Genesis chapter 1 as merely allegory or myth, where do you decide to put that off and say, okay, well, here now we have the historical record? That's a difficult challenge that you are then proposed with. But we make an awful mistake if we approach the book of Genesis merely as history. It is historical, but Genesis chapter 1 to 3 is written in the form of historical poetry. I would suggest that we call Genesis chapter 1 to 3 not just poetry, not just myth, not just history, but poetic history. You see, when you read the Bible in your translation, now I cannot vouch for all the languages, but I can vouch for Afrikaans and English. If you read the Bible in English, you can see that the translators had a very specific focus. Their focus was on translating the word within a context, the context of the narrative, into a modern language for you so that you can understand when you read. But something that can never be translated, and if it can, very rarely, across any language, not just Hebrew to English, but even English to a different language like French or Italian. One thing that we always struggle with translating is poetry. Because poetry in certain languages has a certain rhythm to it, a certain rhyme to it, certain meters to it, certain idioms that is within one language that cannot be brought over to another language. And so our translators work really hard on translating the text faithfully, but it is almost impossible to bring over the poetry. That is a very difficult thing to do. But if you want to read a modern English translation in which a translator attempted to do that, I would recommend to you Robert Alter's translation of the Old Testament. He's one of the foremost Hebrew scholars of our day who did an excellent job with trying to bring out the poetry from Hebrew to English. And so you see, Genesis chapter 1 and 2 was originally written for the Israelites. Most theologians speculate by Moses. As already mentioned, Genesis 1 is not an attack on atheism, but it's an attack on polytheism, the belief in many and false gods. And so, brothers and sisters, this morning I want to plead with you. When you speak with unbelievers, do not use Genesis chapter 1 and 2 as a club to beat them into submission. Use it to teach them about God. Use them to teach them about themselves. It is not a scientific journal, but it is the revelation of God. Now, I want you to look at something very interesting. What are the very first 4 words in your English translation of the Bible? The first 4 words. In the beginning, God. Do you see here any arguments for the existence of God? Do you see some sort of logical debate or some sort of apologetic being given? No. The Bible starts by simply assuming the existence of God, and then everything goes on from there. In the beginning, God. No arguments, no defense, a statement of fact. In the beginning, God. That's why Psalm 14 says, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. That's why April Fools, 1 April is the atheist holiday. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. You see, this contradicts every other account of creation anywhere in the whole world. If you know anything about the ancient Greeks, the ancient Egyptians, the ancient Mesopotamians, the Persians, the Babylonians, pick your civilization. All of them have creation stories. But all of them start by saying the world always existed, and then someday this deity, this God, popped out. Whether it be from the sea, whether it be from the death of some pre-existing giant. Only the Bible switches it around by saying, no, the universe and the material world wasn't eternal. It was created by the eternal existing God. That is a massive difference from every other story, creation story. If you like to read those type of things, go and read the Epic of Gilgamesh that says the whole world and even the gods were created because of this epic battle between nature and chaos creatures, and from that battle, from their flesh, the gods came into existence, and then the gods created humanity and all these type of things. Then the Bible comes and says, no, in the beginning, God. Before that, nothing but God. God has always existed. And so the Bible teaches us 2 things. God always was, and everything else had an origin. Then there's always someone who tries to be smart and say something, well, who created God? Listen, that's the very definition of the word God. The uncreated one, the first mover, the first creator. That is, whatever created God, if something created God, that would then be God. And this thing that we call God would not be God, because by definition, God implies self and eternal existence. But we continue in chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Such a profound statement. You see that word that you have there as created? It's one of my favorite words in the Hebrew language, bara. It's used to show that God creates something out of nothing. It is not merely the forming of something into something new, but the creation of something out of nothing. That is what it's about. In the theological circles, we have this phrase called ex nihilo, which simply is Latin for out of nothing. God created everything out of nothing from Himself. He barad it into existence. And just think about this. What does that teach us about the immense power of God? Who of you can this morning, if the skies clear up, look directly into the sun without going blind? Now just think about the one who created the sun and gives it its light. And the one who created countless of other stars, much bigger than our star, our sun. And God created all of that out of nothing. Why? Because He wanted to. Doesn't that teach us something about the beauty of God? God could have created all of nature to be one color, green. But He creates pink flowers, yellow lilies. Not just do they look beautiful, they smell nice. You can smell them. Some of them you can even eat, and they taste nice. Think about the fact that God could have created every single one of us without the ability to taste. He could have removed the concept of taste buds, not even bring it into existence. We could have been created just to consume food so that we can have energy to live. But He is so kind, so good, so creative, that He grants us taste buds to taste steak and chocolate, a nice cup of coffee. I'll stop there. God is so good. He is so kind that He gives us these things. It shows His immense power and His creativity and His love. But then we go to verse 2. After God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering, some of your translations might say moving, over the face of the waters. You see, here is an example of where we have poetry in Hebrew, but we don't see it in our translations. Those two words, the earth was formless and void. In Hebrew, it is the words tohu vabohu, which it's like in our languages when we say something like chuf chaf, knick-knacks, done and dusted. We have these word plays that we do. And Genesis is full of that. And here is one where the writer says the world was chuf-chaf. It was tohu vabohu. It was formless and void. But how do you translate that? How do you bring that across in a different language? It is intentional word play. That's why Robert Alter, the translation I recommended earlier to you, he translated it as welter and waste. The world is welter and waste, to try and bring over that poetry. I'm just mentioning that. I'm hoping it gives you some appreciation for the text. It's so beautiful. It is so worth our time. But then we have something amazing in verse 2. The Spirit of God was hovering or moving over the face of the waters. When you just read that, again in our translations, what do you think? You sort of see this image of a spirit, a disembodied person moving, gliding, hovering, almost like a spaceship over the earth. And it just feels unintimate, it feels disconnected. But that word that you have there for hovering or moving, depending on your translation, that same word is always used in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible, for embracing. In fact, an example is in Deuteronomy 32, verse 11, where that same word is used of an eagle that cuddles her chicks under her wings. You see, the Spirit of God wasn't just there, unemotionally, disattached, hovering over the face of the waters. The Spirit of God was cuddling, Afrikaans koestering, bringing close. God loves this creation. He loves it. He wants to have it close to Him, just like an eagle would bring her chicks close to her warm embrace. The Spirit of God was hovering, was bringing in close the earth, even when it was formless and void. Even when there was nothing beautiful about it. We see God's love cuddling the earth. Again, what does that teach us about God? It teaches us that God is intimately involved. He isn't distant. He isn't some deity that just spun up creation and put it down and now it's working itself out. He's involved. He's close. He is embracing. He isn't far off, just barking commandments. Oh, let there be light. Oh, let the waters be separated. He is close and nearby, like a craftsman delicately handling this gentle masterpiece, bringing it form and bringing it to life. But then also we have this term Spirit of God. If you read Genesis chapter 1 to Genesis chapter 3, you notice that you sort of see all three persons of the Trinity. Here, in the very beginning of the Bible, we have the Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit. Then obviously later we can maybe ascribe it to the God the Father who is speaking and bringing things into existence. And then later, in a few weeks' time, when we get to Genesis chapter 3, I'm going to make a very convincing argument as to why Genesis chapter 3 is not just the Spirit or the Father, but maybe more specifically it should be interpreted as being the Lord Jesus Christ interacting with Adam and Eve in the garden. But that is for the future. You're going to have to come back if you want to learn that. But here we see the Spirit of God, and the word spirit can also be translated as breath. It's the same Hebrew word. Spirit, breath is the same thing. It shows God as being close. He's intimate with His creation. He loves His creation. He loves this world. Brothers and sisters, yes, I know as Christians, within one of the most controversial things within the church today, unfortunately, is this thing we call global warming. One half of the Christians are saying, no, it's myth and it's fake, and the other half of Christians saying we must take it seriously, and then this one half says, it's all going to burn up anyway in Revelation. And brothers and sisters, even if it's true, our mandate as those who are created in God's image is to love this world like He loves it. Take care of it. We are created for this home. And one day, God is not just going to wipe it out and put us on a different planet. He's going to recreate, make everything new on this world. Let us look after it. Let us be faithful stewards as God's representatives on earth. And let us look after God's creation as He had commanded us at first. But then, in verse 3, we have the first recorded words spoken in all of history. God said, "Let there be light." We all know that one, right? God said, "Let there be light." You see, the Bible is so amazing that when the Bible says God is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the last, He truly is. He is the first one to speak, and one day He will have the last say as well. It would make sense that we see God creating. It makes sense when we see what's the first thing that God creates. The very first thing that God creates is light. Why? Because God is light. 1 John says, God is light, and in Him there is no darkness at all. Now we see God coming into His creation, and what's the first thing He does is He brings His presence about. Let there be light, because the sun hasn't been created yet. The sun is only created in day 4, but yet God brings light into existence. That should remind us of Revelation chapter 21, where it says, in the new heavens and the new earth there will be no sun, because God will be the light to the nations. Here we see something of that represented. A very interesting quote of the famous atheist Richard Dawkins. He once said, "You see, religion is a fairy tale for people who are afraid of the dark." to which John Lennox, the famous apologist, responded by saying, atheism is for people who are afraid of the light. You see, God throughout the whole Bible is always referred to as the God of light. When Jesus comes into the world in the Gospel of John, it says, and the light came into the world, but men loved darkness rather than the light. This is, as already mentioned, before the sun is even created. We'll get back to that slide now. Genesis chapter 1 is composed of 6 days. We have a 6-day creation. When we had our youth one Friday night, I asked them a trick question. How many days of creation were there? And all of them obviously said 7, right? And they were shocked. And I said, no, it's wrong. They're like, no, the Bible says 7. I'm like, no, the Bible doesn't say 7. They're like, okay. I said, go and look. Like, oh, the Bible says 6 days. Yeah, that's correct. There are 7 days, but 6 days of creation. And I want to make the argument that every single day must be interpreted literally, not as symbolic reference to large periods of time, or not ages, or not stages of evolution, but the word that we have there used in Hebrew as yom is always used in the Old Testament to refer to a literal 24-hour day. Examples of that is in Exodus 28, Exodus 20, Deuteronomy 13, where the same word used here is always in reference to a literal 24-hour day. In fact, in Hebrew, there are a variety of words they use in the Psalms and in other prophetic books to indicate large stretches of time, large periods of time. They had that in their vocabulary, yet the writers didn't use it. They only used it in reference to a 24-hour day. But I mean, if you just read Genesis chapter 1, how else could the writer have written it to convince you of a literal 24-hour day? I mean, literally every day is concluded with, and there was evening, and there was morning the first day. The evening, morning, the second day. Evening, morning. How else could the writer have written it to convince you that he is referring to a literal 24-hour day? I think the writer is going out of his way to do that. But then also, I just want to show you that the 6 days of creation that we have, here's where we see the poetic side of it. The first 3 days are actually a mirror of the last 3 days. On day 1, God brings light into existence. And then day 4, God creates the sun, the moon, and the stars. On day 2, God creates the water and the sky and separates them. On day 5, God creates the fish and the birds. And on day 3, God creates the ground and vegetation. And on day 6, the animals and the people. Here we see one of those beautiful ways in which the poetry of this book is just written out. And again, you might be sitting there wondering like, okay, well, what's the purpose? Well, I want to show you that this is beautiful. I want you to have an appreciation for the mastery of this written text. It is so beautiful. But then also, without going more and verse by verse into the book of Genesis, maybe let's spend the last few minutes on just something that's very important. You see, in the book of Genesis, Genesis chapter 1, it's something that we tend to miss when we don't have the original language in front of us. In Genesis chapter 1, there's this thing that we call the temple motif, the temple theme. You see, God's creation, God creating the universe, is God's way of revealing Himself. It is, in essence, God creating a temple for Him in which He reveals Himself to His creation and His people. You see, the number 7, obviously, you just have to read a few chapters of the Bible to realize, wow, the number 7 is quite important. It's very appreciated, very symbolic to the people there. But you see, the number of 7 is more than just for the 7 days of the week. The temple, the tabernacle, was completed in 7 stages. If you go and read Exodus chapter 40, you will see there are many parallels between the creation of the temple and the Genesis account, the creation account in Genesis chapter 1. The ordination of priests, if you go read Leviticus, you see that the priests are ordained in 7 phases that mimic the 7 days that we read about in Genesis chapter 1. But then also, if you read Solomon's speech, when Solomon first opened up the temple after building it, Solomon's speech again mimics the 7 days that we see in the book of Genesis. What this should draw our attention to is this. Think about this. The first people to read the book of Genesis were those Israelites, those Hebrews who came out of the land of Egypt. They now built a tabernacle. They know one day they will be having a temple. And now they read the Genesis account. And they see, wow, God isn't just living in this tabernacle that we're carrying around with us. The whole universe is His tabernacle. All of creation is God stepping into this, saying, here I am revealing myself to you. That shows us again something about God. He is not the God who hides Himself and is distant, but the God who delights in making His creatures know who He is. Another thing that I can just bring your attention to, just for time's sake, I'm going to skip a few things. Have you noticed that in Genesis chapter 1, that God doesn't explicitly, on the day of creation, when He first creates it, He doesn't explicitly say the sun and the moon. Now, some of your translations might mention the sun and the moon in day 4, but literally it just says the larger light and the lesser light. That's such an interesting thing. Why would Moses or whoever wrote it not just say the sun and the moon? Well, simply because, again, what is Genesis chapter 1 attacking? It's attacking polytheism, right? And the sun and the moon in every culture around the world at one stage was seen as gods, as deities. Especially in Egypt, where they were just slaves for 480 years, the sun and the moon were some of their biggest deities. Now they're coming out of Egypt and they're moving into Canaan. And what are the deities that they worship in Canaan? The sun and the moon. They are gods. And now we see Genesis chapter 1, this is sort of like an below the belt jab. Doesn't even mention them by name. In fact, those things you worship as gods, they're just a light, a big one and a lesser one that our God created. Isn't that just amazing, showing God's complete power over His creation? But then in closing, what do we learn about God from Genesis chapter 1? What do we learn? So much we already mentioned. But we learn that God is a God of order. He's not a God of disorder. He's a God of order. When are you happiest in your life, humanly speaking? When you have things sorted out, right? Who of you loves coming to home after a hard day work and you see a pile of dishes that you need to get to? Oh, why don't you like that? Because making order takes time, effort, energy. But we are happy when we live in order. Because God is a God of order. But God is also the creator. But more than that, I want you to think of God not just as creator, but I want you to think of God as creative. Think of God as creative. I've mentioned this a few times, but I will buy a chocolate for the first person who can think of a color that has never existed before and give it a name. Think of a brand new color, one that's up until now has never been existed. You are introducing it to the world now, today. Can you do that? No, it's impossible because we only think of colors within our frame of reference, what we know of. But God created every color. One day in heaven, we will be introduced to colors that we've never seen. How does that even work? We can't fathom. God is so creative, but God is powerful. Created everything simply by speaking it into existence. Brothers and sisters, if the God who created all of existence, the universe that we do not even know the limits of, how can you then doubt His ability and His willingness to love you and provide for you? It is no effort to God. One lady one day came to Martin Lloyd-Jones, a famous preacher in London, and she said, "Pastor, can I bring the little things to God, or only the big things?" Martin Lloyd-Jones simply responded, "Ma'am, to God everything is little." May that encourage you. But we also see that God is a life giver. We see that God is intelligent. We see that God is a giver. Where in Genesis chapter 1 is God taking? He's just giving. He's just giving. He's just bringing into existence and giving and blessing. That is who God is. But we also see that He's a worker. God is a worker. But also, God is a giver of rest. Remember the seventh day? Keep it holy. Rest on it. Rest is a form of worship. Did you know that? Rest is a form of worship. God is a purpose giver. God is ultimate. And ultimately, God is good. God is good. Have you noticed when we read through Genesis chapter 1, what is one of the phrases that is constantly repeated after every day? And God saw it, and it was good. And God saw it, and it was good. And then on day 7 or day 6, after He creates man and woman and all the animals, God saw it, and it was very good. Very good. Because God delights in goodness. But brothers and sisters, this is something for the future. Maybe you're going to have to come back. In Hebrew, especially in the Psalms, they use this word a lot. The word perfect. Why does God not say it's perfect? Don't we always say, before the fall, before Genesis chapter 3, it was perfect? Was it really perfect? Why does God say good? Why does He use the word tov, good? When the word perfect is even used in the book of Genesis just a few chapters later. Something to think about, right? Well, you have to come back to get the answer to that. So God's creation, this world, is the theater on which God puts His glory on display. And just as a taster for what lies ahead, there's much more that we can say from Genesis chapter 1. We can talk about the Sabbath, and we will mention it later. We will speak next time about what is our role and purpose in this world when we look at the creation of man. We will see that there is a specific relationship that we have towards God. In fact, Genesis chapter 1 and 2 mentions 4 types of relationships. I don't know if you noticed that. 4 types of relationships. That's your homework. See if you can figure it out. I'll tell you when you come next time. What about the fall of Satan? Where does that fit into this? Why a snake? That's weird, right? Snake. Where does he come from? Out of every animal, a snake. And have you noticed that God says, let us make man in our image? Why the plural? Come back in the next 6 weeks and you'll find out. Amen. This morning it was my hope that you would come to a renewed appreciation of who God is and the beauty in which the Bible is written. Spend time in it. This is God's holy, holy, holy word. Let's pray. Lord, we are so thankful for starting this journey today. This morning might not have been what many expected, and this morning might be even a bit more academic than hoped for, Lord. But I pray that these little nuggets of truth and wisdom might sit in the hearts of all those who hear. Lord, be glorified this morning as we again come to you and appreciate you and worship you as our Creator, creative, powerful, almighty, life-giving, and blessings-giving God. We pray that we will not forget this during this week, Lord. But may we worship you as we progress every single day in all that we do. In your holy name, amen.